so that, that we can move ahead. And thank you for being here this morning. And we'll be recording this. So Tim and Nick, you might use this in other locations with some other folk that couldn't make it this morning. All righty. And this is a time for us to talk about what keeps us up at night. It's a community conversation on those issues that make our lives difficult, and why these and how these are all connected to our need to participate in this upcoming election. And I'm going to start with just a small passage from Jeremiah, because Jeremiah, more than any other prophet, was saying that God is on the side of justice, on the marginalized, the widows, the orphans, and the sojourners in your midst. Jeremiah said, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me, and I'll come to you and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart, and I'll be found, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I've banished you, and I will bring you back to that place from which I carried you into exile." But a message of hope from the universe. Okay, so let's do just a little name and a question you have, or why you're here today. And there's three of you, so let's just do this. Unmute and say your name and where you're from and why you're here. And we'll start with Tim.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I can't see myself. Okay. Well, I'm here. This fight that we are in for justice. A way that we must put action to it is through the systems that we have that are available to us, as well as making new systems. Okay. So voting is our voice. And so continuing to reaffirm what I think I've learned to this point and continue to learn and translate it so that it moves people to see that they have that power to do that.
Great. And Evan?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, obviously I'm pretty new to all of this, so I guess I'm still learning, but you know, I see a lot of just like environmental stuff even that doesn't, you know, it just goes without any concern. So any of that little stuff I'd like to get more awareness and heard in the higher ups, I guess. So
all right,
there's that.
Sure enough. Nick, if you can just tell us who you are and why you're here today. We'll even put up with the water sound.
Oh boy.
Yeah, just tell us who you are, Nick, and why you're here. Okay, Nick, do that again. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Uh-huh. Go right ahead.
Okay. Why am I here? Well, we are getting CECA back up after this pandemic interruption we had, and I see CECA as being able to offer a lot of the new groups and the new awareness that's dawning in our community with some venues for action. And one of the things I'd like to do is make sure that the election, we reinforce whatever democratic input we have into the country at this time. That's why I'm working with CUJ on this whole voter, voter support issue.
Okay, great. And Susan, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce myself.
Susan, hi. And I'll be on and off mute because my dogs have found something outside to bark at. So when they start making noise, I'm going to be muted and I'll communicate through the chat. But my name is Reverend Susan Smith, and Joan and I do work together. I am in Columbus, Ohio, and am the founder and director of Crazy Faith Ministries. Joan and I had conversations early on because we both worked with the Poor People's Campaign. And one of the things that I was concerned about was that people don't feel heard. The things that people are going through, too many of us do not know about. And in a conversation with Joan, I said, we need to find out what's going on in people's minds and hearts. What does keep them up at night? What is bothering them? What are the things that they're carrying that they don't think anybody cares about, mostly because nobody listens? And so we set this project in motion. Before the pandemic hit, it was the plan to go to all over the state with our little cars and have these meetings with people in cafes and restaurants and wherever we could, face-to-face meetings. Coming out of our comfort zones, me definitely coming out of my comfort zone, and going to places so that we could hear people, let them talk, and us listen. And then after that, have an understanding, or maybe get them to a place where because they felt heard, they would want to fill out, they would understand that they do have power, and that they would want them to not only fill out a voter registration form, but be inspired to work to help other people understand and to get empowerment as well, and to actually go to the polls. And so that's been the goal, to talk to people, listen to people, not talk to them as much as to listen to them, record those concerns, and then use to feed that information to people that need to know it, but also use that as the impetus to get people out of their homes and out of a place of fear and apathy and complacency, and absolutely to the polls, which we absolutely have to do at this point in time in our lives. That's why.
Amen. And I'm Reverend Joan Van Beesler, and I'm the Director of Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio. And I'm also with the Nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee, and so is Susan. And I'm here for all the good things Susan said, and because I believe that this November, we are actually in a struggle for the heart of our democracy and the soul of the nation. And anything we can do to help people realize how important this is, I want to put my efforts for it. So that's who I am, and I live in Columbus, Ohio. So let me tell you about why we're here. We're going to talk about what keeps us up at night, as Susan's already said. We're going to talk about the reality of voter suppression, the threat to our democracy, the fight that we're engaged in right now in order to have our voices heard. We're going to check our registration status, okay? Because it's amazing how many people have been purged and don't know it, or they've moved and they're not in the registration rules right. So we'll do that at the end. And that will also give you a chance to see how you can help others check their registration status and even register to vote. And then at the end, ask you to volunteer to help inform others, register others, support voter turnout despite the COVID-19, because we all want fair and accessible and safe elections. Susan?
So like I said in our opening, a lot of people don't vote. And I just heard a report where I heard that if we can increase the voter turnout in November from where it is to go over 50%, so we get 60% or 70%, that will be a great way to make sure that we are voting our candidates and our issues. Our job here is not to tell you who to vote for. This is a nonpartisan effort, but we do believe and we know that voter participation has to increase. So there are reasons why people don't vote, including that our votes don't count. They do. And the example that I always use is that in Cleveland, Ohio, the prosecutor who did not bring charges against the police officers who shot and killed 12-year-old Tamir Rice, the people voted him out of office. We have power, and that's one of our jobs, is to tell people, ensure people that we have power. Our power is in our numbers. So that's one of the reasons. So people don't think their votes will count. Many people have not registered, or people think they've registered and they have not, or their registration is incomplete. for some reason. We had way too many, I have an exact figure someplace, but we had a huge number of voter registrations in the 2016 and 18 elections that were returned. So part of our job is to find out if, you know, like Joan said, have to check your registration and to see why people haven't registered, or to let them know that they have registered but something is wrong, because the voter suppression issue is very real. And then a lot of people won't vote because they say that they don't believe in the system. And everybody, I think everybody is troubled by what they're seeing going on, whether they're liberal or conservative. I hate all those, you know, the right, left, you know, up, down. I hate all those categories, but the system that we have all known, whatever category that we're in, is being really challenged on a number of levels. Well, if we didn't believe in the system before, we probably don't believe much in it now, but we need to hear that from people, because those are the types of things that we're going to be feeding back to the people who need to hear it.
Yep. And just to put a little bit more on that, they held a student voter registration drive in 2018 at OSU, had all these thousands of registrations. 50% of them were tossed out because they were incorrect. So that's why we do want to always check. Okay.
Voting is our right, and it's the only way we can take care of ourselves and our needs. And I think one of the authors, Carol Anderson, who wrote White Rage, she did a lot of research on it, but she was talking about how she checks her registration every single week, once a week. And we are asking people to do that, because one of the things that we do know is that if people register and if people get to the polls and then are told that they are not registered or are turned away for any reason, it cuts their joy. It cuts their belief even more. So we are trying to make sure that we're taking every precaution and having people take every precaution to make sure that they are truly registered, because it's our only work. I mean, we can't do anything else. Clearly, we can't do anything else. We are watching things happen, and we, the people, are just watching it happen. But our vote is what helps us to get people in office that will take care of our interests and our concerns.
Yep.
So we want you to vote, and we want you to be advocates to help people to vote. We want you to be on fire about this. We want you to not be afraid of people saying, oh, I don't want to vote, you know, because people are going to say that. We want you to be comfortable with the fact that you might get some of that as you get people to talk, but we also want you to know enough about what's going on in your community, in your part of the city, and your part of the state, that will speak to people, because the election is not just the presidential election. That's, you know, part of it. But we say all of the time that you could vote somebody into the presidency in DC and still be screwed up because you've got the wrong people in office on the local level. And so part of what we're doing is telling people that our vote counts when it comes to judges and prosecutors and city attorneys and council persons and state lawmakers and school levies. We are trying to get people to understand, and we have to develop a really good education thrust because of that. So that might be a way that you want to participate and be involved, because we vote candidates and we vote issues, and both of them are equally as important. So if you feel one way on an issue, but you vote for a candidate who is against that issue, you're cutting yourself off at the knees. So we have to engage in, and first of all, letting people know that it's not just the presidential election, but that it is the local elections, and that we have to be very clear in order to explain and elucidate the issues and talk about the candidates.
I have a question.
Yes.
I've been hearing about strategies that are being employed to actually present physical barriers to voting, like the limiting of polling places. I think that in Kentucky there was one major city that had one polling place open for the whole city. And I'm also hearing that once they have these people funneled into lines, that they are going to be, they're going to have recruit people. I'm talking about the Republicans now are going to recruit people to go and stand in those lines and make them longer and tie them up. So are we addressing anything like that? Is the voter, is that going to be part of our strategy to address that sort of thing?
Well, it have to be part of our strategy. One of the things that we're doing today is looking at that film called Suppression, because voter suppression is a huge issue all over the place. And so part of the listening that we're doing is hearing stuff like that. That, like, if you're in an area where, like, where was it that in was it Texas? Where was it this year? They used to have 3,200 polling places, and they diminished them down to 200. We're going to have to know,
Kentucky.
know, but the people who are, Kentucky, thank you. But the people who are working on this are going to have to know that information and feed it to us so we can feed it to the people who can handle it and address it. Yeah, so we are addressing that. Voter suppression is the biggest thing we're fighting. That's what all this hoopla is about not allowing people to vote by mail. It's a ploy when most of the people who, are talking about how wicked and evil, corrupt voting by mail is, have voted by mail all their lives. So the thrust is on to keep the masses of the people, all races, all ethnicities, all religions, out of the polls, to do something that's going to discourage them. Yes, we absolutely are going to be addressing that. Thank you.
And there is a team with NOVOC, the nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee, that is looking specifically at election protection, and they are starting up their meetings and trainings very, very soon. So that's, if you're signed up on NOVOC for the election protection team, then you'll be hearing from them soon. They were just planning their first meetings. And also too, right now there's a number of Senate and House bills, House Bill 680, Senate Bill 191, that we are fighting actively against, with a very big push right now on the Ohio legislators. And tomorrow night, Monday night, we have a meeting that we're going to be focusing on the state of House Bill 680 and Senate Bill 191 and what we're doing to combat that. So definitely part of it. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Nick. So our question, go ahead.
I put a comment in the chat if you saw it, and it addresses what Nick had just said to some extent, and that's that the result, or at least this perspective I did here, was that the result of the one polling place around, I think it was Lexington perhaps, or wherever Mitch is, seated at, it was that they had such a high vote by mail turnout that it actually wasn't was in some degree, obviously, they will obstruct the vote any way they can. And I see that this is some of this, maybe this is some co-opting where, yeah, it is the result of successful vote by mail effort, and the governor really did support that. So there's a big key about vote by mail, is getting the governor behind it too. Mm-hmm. And that there is a positive spin-off that can create some of that. I don't think the downsizing and the repair some of the cumbersome bureaucracy around the way we have to vote is a bad thing by any means, and anymore, everything has changed. Everything should be our focus on enabling people to vote in a new virus world, I think, that is not going back to the way it used to be. And, so a lot of that, I think we should talk up. And like Susan just said, obviously, this ridiculous vote by mail obstruction is the most just on its face, blatant obstruction,
Right.
And I want to say one more thing before we go forward, because of this obvious captive audience you have, is that we have a rich history in Coshocton, and both Nick and I was a statewide organizer of the presidential vote recount following the 2004 election here in Ohio, and Nick was a county organizer. And we conducted recounts in 8 counties around Coshocton, and there's extensive history of what we found in Coshocton. If you were here during that time, and you may not have been, but the Cuyahoga County prosecutor had prosecuted 2 of the election officials there for blatant election irregularities that happened here as well. And it is so documented to the point that the Board of Elections sent me a letter admitting to it, kind of throwing themselves at the mercy of the people in a good old boy place. So this is, this is really a good place to make this a high profile effort by us. And because of our experience, especially just on this call here, we need all this information. This is current information, and you're dealing with, a knowledgeable small audience. And what I'm thinking as you do this is, as we leave here today, Nick and I have kind of separating our efforts, and it's going to broaden our reach, I think, a little bit between what's going on in CECA and what's going on with the campaign here. And it's going to, I hope, broaden our audience. So as we go through this, comments that you can make that help us go forward with the idea of how we are really going to act on this, down to having door-to-door campaigns in the town. We're very good at door-to-door campaigning in this town, for all kinds of issues. And it's something that can be done with safely, I think. So just a note that that's kind of where we're at, only because there's just, 5 of us here today.
Right. Susan, shall we move on?
Yeah, we can move on. What keeps you up at night? That's what we're interested. What do you worry about, and how does this affect your everyday life? We need for you guys to know what keeps you up at night. But we also want all of us to be developing ears to hear that from other people. And I think that there are a lot of common things at this point that are keeping us awake at night. Medicaid cuts, this recent whatever to destroy the Affordable Care Act, especially in this time of pandemic, and which makes no sense. But a lot of people are concerned about that. Families and children that are hungry, the number of people who are going to be hungry and who are going to be evicted is going to dramatically increase. And I would assume that people would be talking about that. Of course, the healthcare and the loss of hospitals in rural areas, student debt and other debt, job loss and underemployment, COVID-19 and how it is wrecking our lives. People are going to want to talk about that because it is recognized. There's a lot that we don't hear on television or on the radio, but COVID-19 is really, and it's a clash, or it's a clash, but like a connection also with the racial stuff that's going on. So all of that together is really forcing a change in the world that we knew it as we knew it. And I think people may want to talk about that. Any others that you come up with, they will, and I'm pushing us along because we have to show that thingy, but
yeah,
you might want to put in the chat other things that people might want to, what might be concerned about, because we need to be in touch with all of those and have listening ears for those. So if something you think people would want to talk about, but they haven't mentioned it, we can encourage them to mention it.
Mm-hmm.
So, in our, is this you, Joan? Cool.
Yeah. Now, it's just a couple of things that have kept us up at night. And I'm not going to read through all of these because you can see them on the screen. But as you look at these issues, are there any that just jump out at you as particularly important, or ones that that have a direct impact on you? Take a minute and take a look at that. The fact that back in 2016 we have more restrictions on our voting is one that has been particularly concerning. Are there any of these that that really strike you, that really leap out at you? All of
I'll
them.
reserve my for last.
Okay, Evan?
What is that?
Evan? was wondering if you had one that leapt out at you, because you've been very
If the
quiet.
cost of living this, well, I'm muted too. So the 74 hours of work week for a bedroom apartment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One.
Yep, that's one. Any others that people want to raise up before I move on?
Well, I'll tell you, in our community, because I'm a business person, and to some degree, in that we have been able to have all our employees make at least that $15 an hour living wage with our basic health insurance. And it's only, we've been able to do it. It's just an unusual situation that allowed us to start happening. And Evan is one of the workers. And so when he sees that and then sees this flip side, it shows that what a big impact a living wage has on him. And although he's single, I mean, that's still going forward and thinking about the future and trying to do that in our neck of the woods. A $15 an hour job is, boy, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
That is really hard, so how, I see ways where that all comes with all things becoming more local, including our economies, and, all that's part of the Green New Deal, and it figures into, some resolution of that. But that is especially, plus of course, Appalachia has 60% of all of Ohio's impoverished. So we see it here, Nick and I, and the people that we want to be able to share this with. I think that's Coshocton's a pretty cosmetically nice town, but it has that Appalachian secret that, our wealth is incredibly low compared to any other parts of the state or the country.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that fact there. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, things that keep us up at night and are directly impacted by who we elect and how we vote.
One of the things that stood out for me was the idea of 61% of Ohioans in poverty. And I worry about whether or not our people in our county, the children are getting enough to eat and things like this. I don't know. We've never dealt with that issue directly, hunger in our county. There are people who are working on that in the county, but usually they're faith-based, and they hold once a month food, food resources for people. But I'm very concerned about that right now.
Of course. Yep, things that keep us up at night. Susan?
I have one other thing I want to mention too, and a good way for us to find that out, since our attendance is low here today, or is real today, is that Evan recorded the entire speaking demonstration that we had on Saturday honoring George Floyd around the country, that we were in the streets, and Evan has that completely recorded. We haven't seen it yet. It's really beautiful because it includes exactly what you just asked. What keeps us up at night? It was beautiful, and that can be a part of us taking this forward here. So go ahead.
Okay.
So all of those reasons, it's important for us to understand that it's time for us to speak up. It's not a time to be quiet. We talk about the pandemic of the virus, but there's also a virus in this country of denial and wanting to be silent about and not talk about things that are uncomfortable. It's time for us to talk about things that are uncomfortable because many of us are. And so that's what we need to do. So just a quick question, because I was just very moved by this the other day. Maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, but we're going to show you this video. But do you think, quick answer, We got some preachers in this group. Y'all like to talk a lot. I love this. It's wonderful, but I need some quick answers for this. Do you think there is voter suppression in Ohio? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Who else? Nick, did you just say anything?
Yes.
Okay, Evan?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, do you think it's widespread or do you think it's pretty small?
Well, I think it's widespread
Okay.
because of my experience tells me that. I've seen it. It is widespread.
Widespread.
Agreed.
Okay, Nick?
I'm not sure how our county works, but I know that we've had big purges in our voter registration past years, huge purges in our local rolls. So I would have to say yes.
Okay. Evan? Do you think?
I'd say it's, I don't know. I know a lot of people that just don't vote because, well, they just don't vote. So
Right.
that's what I don't get. So, but yeah, I'd say it's more widespread than what I can actually see. So
Right. That's one of the reasons we're going to show this, because one of the comments that we got the other night, if you remember, Joan, somebody said, well, I don't think it's like that in Ohio. And both Joan and I said, oh, yeah, it is. It's just as bad. Since 2010, 24 states have implemented new restrictions on voting. In our state, in Georgia, we have the use it or lose it laws, which purge voters from the rolls. When we were registering people for the 2018 elections, and my daughter and a team of us went out on the streets and with just registering people, and people would say, I'm already registered, but we asked them on the spot to look, to look at it. We looked it up, and many of them found that they had been purged. So, and they say that if you haven't voted in X number of years, that's the rationale for Ohio, then they say by law they can take you off. There's a broader strategy to limit access to the ballot. We've all seen that, and I think it's only going to increase as we get closer to our general election in November. And we're seeing a national effort by conservative forces to restrict voter rights, which that's not new. That has always happened historically, but in this election, we have to be going to this with our eyes wide open, because we just can't let them just do it. We have to know about it, and we have to develop strategies to get around it.
And they're getting very creative in the ways they're doing it. This is just a small video about what happened in the Georgia primary. And then we'll move from this into the larger video about what happened in Georgia. Or pardon me, this is Wisconsin, and then we'll look at Georgia.
We expect more cases, we expect more deaths, we expect more tragedies. I cannot in good conscience allow any types of gathering that would further the spread of this disease and to put more lives at risk. There's not a sufficiently safe way to administer in-person voting tomorrow.
I am 65. I'm a type 2 diabetic. I've had heart issues. I mean, those are the risk factors they say can make it more serious.
I actually think that it's suppressive and dangerously irresponsible that the legislature hasn't either delayed the election or made it all mail-in ballot. I had a moment where I just really was not sure that I could do this. I woke up crying.
We have some best practices thing set up in there with a plexiglass shield between the voter and the poll workers. We're going to have masks available, gloves available, hand sanitizer, but it's still going to be something that is a risk. We normally use 13 different polling locations. We normally have 300 poll workers to staff those locations. As of 10 days ago, we were down to 40.
Susan, you want me to take this slide?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Now, Ohio, as we've said, is one of those states that purges inactive voters if you haven't voted in 6 years or 2 general elections. And we purged 267,000 registrations just in January of 2019, not that long ago. And then they planned for a second purge in September of 2019. But the Dispatch, the newspaper in Columbus, actually, just through a cursory glance at it, identified 1,600 active voters who were incorrectly marked for purging. And that was not a heavy investigation. They just looked at it and they found all these guys. Some had voted as recently as 2018. And so in Columbus, election officials then looked at it and they identified another 1,100 people flagged for purging, even though they had signed petitions, which is counted as being an active voter. So at that point, the September 2019 purge was stopped, of course. But Ohio Secretary of State LaRose said that Ohio's county by county voter registration, he admitted that it leads to a mess of inconsistent data when it comes to purging. But even with all of these discoveries, the Secretary of State did not look backward to check if any errors had occurred in January 2019. So a lot of people were purged and may not even know it now. And more purges are now being planned. So just to update you on that story right there. Now, this next video is on what is called Suppressed. And it is put out by Fair Fight, which is the Stacey Abrams folk. And it's documenting all of the things that they did in the Georgia elections. And then we'll talk about it.
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state. Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote!
When do we want it?
Today!
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in. They're in the wood. They're eating the wood away. And you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late.
We have a historic decision today, striking down a key part of the Voting Rights Act, the civil rights law passed back in 1965.
The Supreme Court essentially said racism is over, and these communities don't need to pre-clear these changes anymore.
This decision leaves virtually unprotected minority voters in communities all over this country.
We are witnessing a tidal wave of voter suppression around the country.
If you look at Alabama,
Arkansas, North Carolina,
Ohio,
Kansas, North Dakota,
Michigan,
Wisconsin,
and Georgia, which is becoming ground zero.
We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
For spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesty above the fruited plain.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I was superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomason, Georgia, Upson County, and I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voter right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they closed the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion.
I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what?
Then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing them too much money.
First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor, on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was in a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black had to go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force. They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
Got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. The other one was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on election day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Shellman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
They called the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls mean.
With 2 months
months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the posts we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters, and if they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
Keep your eyes on the prize.
This is Fulton County. Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history.
Keep your eyes on.
It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
Hold on, keep your eyes on the prize.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president.
Thousands have purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000 had no idea they could vote.
Other states use the same over who's been removed from the voter roll.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics specifically and disproportionately target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
My name is Norman Broderick. I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. And she admitted that yes, they did mess up. It was their fault. But there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late. It's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook, and like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee."
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about. 40 case is not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
Great Tuesday morning, Election Day.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections. The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
I've never seen one.
The line hasn't moved in over an hour. The line is running out.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do. The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. And then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. I got to the door. That's when they was checking your ID before you go in. And she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett. And I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady. She came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
Register somewhere else and they pulled it up in the system. Don't hit my eye.
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People were like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'm gonna be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now, the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork, had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID. Wow. And so she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old. And I'm 82.
Yeah, I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election.
I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, "No, you're not registered." And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match, and Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, now all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said, you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about 4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Winter Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drive on campus, within a community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not gonna be able to vote myself.
Like when I was growing up, voting was a thing. It was an event. And so little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote, and then you get there and the experience is just terrible, and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting me know now? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote.
It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait. 5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
And you decide you can't stand it, you can't take it anymore? Are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go. All night on Twitter, a trending topic, hashtag stay in line.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up at 4:06. I picked my son up and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there and the line has tripled. And I was like, oh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give them because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines. That broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called there, the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20-some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see, there was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
No, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession, because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
This is systematic. If you look at what has happened across this country in the last 5 years, 40 states have passed some kind of law to make it more difficult for people to vote.
In Arkansas, the Supreme Court upheld a measure requiring voters to show photo ID.
North Carolina, where it targeted African Americans. In Alabama, the governor was shutting down DMVs.
In Ohio,
Kansas, tens of thousands of people were prevented from voting.
Texas allows a concealed gun license to vote, but will not include college IDs.
Indiana, they purge 500,000 voters.
Wisconsin, where a recent photo ID law may have handed the 2016 election to Donald Trump.
We lost 41,000 voters. I think it changed the outcome of the election in the state of Wisconsin.
America. We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We are here to resist an ID law that is undemocratic, unconstitutional, and immoral.
People are demanding democracy. In Washington, there's a new Native American Voting Rights Act. New Mexico now has same-day voter registration. Colorado, Nevada, Florida, and Arizona all passed laws restoring voting rights to those formerly incarcerated. Indiana blocked a law that would have allowed purging. New York, activism led to an expansive package of voting reforms. Michigan, a ballot initiative to end extreme partisan gerrymandering. And there's national legislation now to restore the Voting Rights Act.
These efforts are being fought in the streets. They are being fought in the city councils. They are being fought in the state legislators.
We belong together. We are all part of the fabric of this country, and we understand what's at stake.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people, it is about America itself.
On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
We have the power to change this. We are going to vote you out so that we really do have fair and free elections.
Okay, one word from everyone, just one word after having seen it. One word. Tim.
Truth.
Confused. Nick.
Truth.
You said true? Who said true? Okay, truth, thank you. Okay, Nick.
Truth.
Nick,
I sold anger.
anger, okay. Evan?
Baffled, I guess. Baffled.
Okay, baffled. That's why that word? I don't think we've ever heard baffled in all of our sessions. Why are you baffled, Evan? That's good. But why are you baffled?
Sorry, Dan, but I guess, you just, believing, you think the government's supposed to be that way, and then blatantly, obviously not, then suppressing everyone's right to vote. And I guess that.
That's exactly why we show it. Because most people, and we've shown it to racially mixed groups, and you'll see black people shaking their heads. Most people don't think that that type of suppression goes on. And they especially don't think that it will affect, it's like voter suppression affects somebody else, not us. But this is very widespread. Tim said he doesn't think it's this widespread in Ohio, but it is. The closing of the polls, the taking people's names off of the rolls, all of that, it is so widespread. And what it does is, in addition to keeping people away from polls, it keeps people or makes people never want to participate in the system again. And that's what we are fighting. That's why knowing that voter suppression exists is so important. Every time I see this, and Joan and I have seen this 100 times, every time I see it, I am angry all over again.
Yeah.
And I cry every time I hear Elijah Cummings,
Yeah, I can't. I mean, if you've been, affected by oppression in this country, you're not surprised, but it still just makes you angry. And so one of our goals is to get all people to see that it is bad, that so they documented it in Georgia, but if we documented it in Ohio, you would see the exact same thing. You would see it. There may be nuances of changes or differences, but it would be there. That's why we need for people to see it. We need for people to be very intentional about checking their own registrations. Carol Anderson says she checks her registration once a week. I have resorted to doing that. OhioVotes.org is a good site. That's the site that we're using to ask people to go to check it once a week. I know people, and this is what I'm talking about, Tim. I have a friend who used to own a business here. He's been voting for, 50 years. And for the 2018 election, he went to his polling place, the same place he's gone for all his life. His name was not on the rolls, and he had been purged because they said he had not been voting. It's so widespread. And so we have an obligation to teach people that, to make them understand that the powers that be are traipsing over the rights of all of us to vote. And that's not a new thing. Again, people have, tampered with the right to vote of all people since elections have been had. But it is going on, and it's being increased, especially in this particular political season. But it happens in all of our elections.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
No, you misunderstand me, Susan. I know that's prevalent, but as we go to different parts of the state, it looks so different.
Okay.
See, there's only 70 some voters in our township, and we go up to a very friendly country pole barn type township hall, and then we vote next to the salt spreader and the road grader, and it's like very, very community. I mean, the same women have been working there for the 33 years that I've been voting here. So it just has such a different face, because our county is one of the ones who created some tremendous election violations in the 2004 election here. So what my comments were to is that, and I see those long lines, and I saw them ever since I became a little bit aware, but does it look different to white people in rural areas, and that systemic, and it's oppression, because it's beyond racism just here, because there's a lot of white people who are suffering that, as their treatment as the other. But if the white people are suffering, and imagine with those small, great minorities of Black and people of color communities that are suffering, So I am aware of that. I guess I'm just wondering, how do we communicate all these different, these these basic truths that we know about our democracy, that it ain't, you know, and in the practice of it, it is not a democracy. It's never been beyond a democracy on paper. But it looks so different that when I say you cannot believe that people would have to turn away and go home and give up their right to vote against George W. Bush because they couldn't vote. If I went and we held a town hall, there wouldn't be anybody that would even want to listen to that here. Yet poor people, and Evan is he's a personal friend of mine. And I see these things that he expresses to you guys and to us today. They're such the essence of what we see in the county. Young white people who have been disconnected because of their parents, who have been really disconnected, and a very small member of people of color community, but recently we find out it's tremendous. How do we weave this together? Because we're governed by white privilege here, and there's just not enough real life that people are willing to bring out in public out of their own closets to demonstrate how alike we are.
Right. I think you're spot on, and I'm going to turn this over to Joan in a second. But one of the things that we're teaching is that white supremacy is not just a problem of race; it is a problem of economics and class. And so, white supremacy is also sexist, and it's anti-poor, and it's anti anyone who's not of a certain socioeconomic rank and a certain gender. So the value. And most of us live in a world where we think like Evan, oh, that doesn't happen. So the value in seeing and showing this video to people and having them have conversations about it, opening their eyes and having conversations about it, I think is a great tool to use in order to get people activated and excited to help us turn the tide. So I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to Joan.
Part of all of this is the realization that this election cycle in particular, we need to all be incredibly more intentional than we have been in the past about helping other folk see the need for voting and helping them register. This is no time for a casual democracy, as we can see from that video and from the things that we all have seen and know about and talked about already. We also know that in Ohio, a lot of our communities are underrepresented in election turnout. In 2018, only 50% of the adults across all demographics, only 50% of the registered voters turned out to make their voice heard and to make decisions for all of us. Voter registration, of course, is the very first step in creating a more active and engaged citizenry and community, because this is no time for casual democracy. And we know that elected officials pay attention to communities that show up and vote. And we want all of our communities to be valued and to be heard. So it's not enough to just register people to vote. You can go door to door and stand on their front porch and get them to sign a registration form and turn it in. But that does not guarantee that they go out and vote, or even vote for their own self-interest. Like we said, 50% of the folk in Ohio don't show up. And when it comes to younger folk, only 22% showed up of registered voters in 2018. Other states have 65% or more. And that's what we're trying to reach here. But we say, okay, we got COVID, right? That means we can't go door to door and talk to people. We can't meet in great big groups and do rallies. It is not safe. We're seeing that right now, that we can't delude ourselves and think it's safe. But that's why we've got our nonpartisan Ohio voter outreach committees working in various ways to reach people using social media, computer, old-fashioned telephone. Spent yesterday morning learning how to do old-fashioned telephone and texting. And even if you can't text, you can still call people up that you know and make sure that they're registered to vote. At the very minimum, You can call the folk that you know and have them check their registration or guide them through ohvotes.org on how to vote. You can share local issues, information by social media or telephone. And we're going to be doing more of that too, with the League of Women Voters as one of our partners. We're going to be looking at the statewide issues. We're not going to be telling people how to vote, but we're going to be saying, if you're concerned about XYZ, here's how the candidates stand on XYZ. We're going to be holding webinars and educational summits. So, and maybe we can register people face-to-face when it's safe, but we're not going to count on that one. And maybe if people have to vote in person, we can drive people to the polls with good safety precautions. But that's going to be something that we have to work on. And yes, that's one of the teams too on the NOVOC, is figuring out how to drive people safely to the polls when it comes to that. So the question I have then is, if this is not a time for a casual democracy, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to commit to today to be part of this movement? Now, I know Nick has already signed up for NOVOC, which is absolutely great. But what do you think you can do? And talk to somebody about voting, check your own registration, call 3 others, family, friends, help them check their registration, have them then call 3 more. It takes no technology whatsoever. Or volunteer to help reach out with protection, education, registration, transportation, other forms of support. Now, sometimes I'll ask people to go around in a circle and say one thing that they're willing to do, but I'll ask you to put it in the chat box if there's something that you think that you would be willing to do. Because you can join us to make a difference on NOVOC. We're doing, like I said, registration, education, protection, support, idea sharing, collaboration, because staying home is an option and it is safe and you can still make your voice heard. And you can sign up if you haven't at our little bit.ly there, or I'm going to send everybody who registered for this an email showing how you can sign up to be part of NOVOC and how you can have your say in this election process, whether, like I said, whether it's using cell phone, calling people, helping them with transport, etc. Okay. And right now, I want you to all pull out your cell phone if you got one and check your own registration, or you can even do it online. Have you checked your registration lately? ohvotes.org. Do that? Yeah, do that right now and tell me what you find.
I'm going to this.
Tell me what you find. And if you find you're not registered, then we'll help you after this is over. I'll help walk you through it, okay? Are you registered, Tim?
I'm still replying to your question,
okay.
Your ask for what I'm willing to do. It's long.
Oh, okay. Bless
You're
your
a
soul.
preacher in your heart. Tim is a preacher.
I swear, yeah. Most people will do
my ears picked that up, and I take that, Susan, as an encouraging thing, because somebody is responsible for my abilities to speak my heart a little more clearly now.
Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
Good.
So you just keep on, Tim. Nick, Evan, are you registered? Are you sure you're registered? Yes or no?
Ready to vote, so.
Yes. Okay. Hey, and if you look at that page, if you see that little button that says I pledge to vote, you see that little button on there?
I'm still checking.
Okay. Pledge to vote then. Press that little red button that says pledge to vote so that we know that we can send you a reminder about the dates. We can remind you about upcoming webinars and information about candidates' issues and where they stand. So pledge to vote. Be sure you pledge to vote at ohvotes.org. And I'm going to give you another little minute here. And
I'm doing
Tim,
that right now.
all right. And Tim is going to sign up and help organize Zoom presentations. And then follow with door to door. That can happen. Okay, but be safe.
Yeah, be safe, please.
Well, I'm not, I am very cognizant of that. I think I had wished that some of the other folks that I had invited and who responded that they would come would have been here, because one of my concerns is, and it's not limited to young people, of course, because there are a lot of young folks that are doing this, but this distancing and trying to think of doing all of this as a community, we're not doing it. It's terrible. And I wanted to address that to a much wider audience, and that will be one of the things that has to be addressed right away, because I truly believe we can't live in. But that's a whole new thing for us. It's not so simple to just say we can't live in, we'll wear a mask. It's being successful and continuing to be safe. I'm really, really concerned about that.
Yeah, we are too. We are too. And I was going to tell you at the General Assembly of the UUA, the last couple of days, they've been running phone banking and helping remind people and make sure that they're going to go out and vote in the Texas primary, and telling them how to get their absentee ballot in Texas. And just, a few dozen people have already made something like 50,000 contacts and talked with people and reminded them about how to get their absentee ballots, so that despite the virus, they can still have their voice heard. So it is possible to reach out. It is possible.
Anytime, part of that new thinking I catch myself in is that, well, yeah, we can do a door-to-door. We'll do a virtual door-to-door. There's got to be a way to do that that lets us start thinking. That's me, the troglodyte, dragging along on technology. I learned Word. I was the last one in the county to learn Word, but I used the heck out of it. So
we got the technology, but you can also start where you are, and that's calling 3 people and asking them to call 3 people and 3 people and 3 people. At the very, very least, you can get them onto ohvotes.org and do an old-fashioned phone tree. That's something that anybody can start like right now. Okay. So Nick, Evan.
I did not get a match. I don't know whether it's the way I put my name in or what, but
try it on your computer again. But what you might want to do then, and you can always do this, is re-register. You can register as many times as you need to make sure it is right. If you don't show up, you can re-register. Evan, are you registered?
Yeah.
Yes, oh, that's right. You said you were. Okay, and Tim is checking. So, Susan, did you have some final words for us?
No, I'm just glad that the 3 of you were here, because I think every single tiny step we take to inform people, educate people, mobilize people, encourage people means something, and it's so important. So I just really want to thank you. And Joan and I are available for whatever type of help that you want, need. If you get a time when there's more people that you think want to see it, and you don't want to run it yourself, although you can, we can send you the stuff for you to run it yourself. If you don't want to run it yourself, we can certainly help you with that. But the important thing is to get the word out so that people can see with their eyes and then vote with their feet. So thank you very much.
And I will definitely share this stuff with you, Tim, so you can do that too. All right?
Well, and I also would want you, both to whatever I can do to lighten your load, and I'm sure Nick would feel the same way. We will have various outlets, but if you guys have the time, I've got the place for you. So
all right,
we'll take advantage of your offer. Did Jerry do that?
Yeah, that was Jerry. I know. Okay.
I saw that. That's get off.
And we have this as a recording, and I will put it online, even with my spouse, patting me on the cheek here. So let me, yeah, you got dog problems, I got spouse problems. Let me close with a little saying, and then we'll end this today. People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time. You got to take one step at a time, because a pebble cast in a pond sends ripples out that spread in all directions. And each one of our thoughts, our words, our deeds, our voter registrations are like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There is too much work to do. Thank you.